Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in the book New Studies in Hegel, published by Holt, Rinehart, and Winston in 1971. We're going to take a look at an essay by Harris entitled Hegel's Theory of Feeling, pages 71 to 92. But it really is on Hegel's philosophy of mind, but he entitled it Hegel's Theory of Feeling. And we'll look at it in 3 moments. We'll begin with Hegel's philosophy of mind, and then the key turning points in the dialectic, and then essence, transitioning to spiritual mindedness. Let's get started. Let's go to block 1. Take a look at Hegel's philosophy of mind. The philosophy of mind addresses the relation between nature and mind, actually between Hegel's notion, nature, and mind, all within the workings of the dialectic. So block 1, note 2, the workings of the dialectic include a movement of thought as the immanent principle of all activity, which continuously develops the real. And Harris is right. Hegel should never be reduced to a simple triad. His system is much more complex than a simple triad. And then block 1, note 3, dialectical thought is always construction of a worldview, of a universal worldview. And that worldview will contain the unity of multiple internal differences, all correlated in a very complex way, as an ontological form, a structure of existence. And it will go through many different progressive phases as we develop it. What we want to do is characterize the universal by constructing our worldview. We want to characterize the meaning of the universal. And we want to do that as we make it concrete as what Hegel calls the absolute idea. The absolute idea. And the absolute idea is the full realization of the ontological trinity as it completes its own triune self-manifestation, that is, absolute idea. Let's go on to block 2. Okay, block 2. Key turning points in the dialectic. First, we have the turning point from logic to the essence within existence. Logic of the idea transitions to essence within nature. We begin with the idea as intuitively grasped, and then from essence we will again transition to spirit or mind. That'll be the next key transition point. So we passed over into being for another. We negate determinate particulars of the surface reality in order to affirm the inner essence which is veiled behind surface reality. Then we reach that key turning point of the return for the self. This is the fulfillment of the logic of philosophical reflection, where we identify the eidos ideas or the eidos categories as an activity of our thought, and it is an activity of thought as noesis, which means to perceive and to understand in a spiritual way, from the verb in the New Testament, noeo. to perceive and to understand in a spiritual way, is called noeo. We run into it a lot in the second half of the Gospel of Mark. But initially, truth does remain abstract. We next transition to the immanent idea, becoming conscious of itself in our own self-conscious awareness. Subject and object are united within our worldview because it is what? It is a posited worldview, and that links together subjectivity and objectivity. Then we will have attained unto the absolute philosophical idea, the full, concrete manifestation of the divine philosophical idea. But the key point is that subject and object become linked together for Hegel, because we remembered from past lessons, the realm of positing, which for Hegel is the realm of spirit, is where we posit or present our worldview sign model that is a subjective construction, but we posit it at the edge of objectivity. It is two sides of a single hinge. Hegel even calls it a hinge moment. Subjectivity of constructing the sign model on the subjective side, and the objective filter for all reality on the objective side. So it's always the realm of positing where we posit our worldview as an internal externality. That's where we get that concept. We posit our worldview as an internal externality, as that which is constructed internally and posited as a filter through which we interpret all of external reality. We're always interpreting our environment, and the habit we need to develop is to interpret our environment with spiritual perception. We need to practice living in the realm of spirit. We need to abide in the realm of spirit. And we abide in the realm of spirit by making our perception the habit of becoming spiritual understanding. In other words, to practice the concept of noesis. That comes from the second half of the Gospel of Mark, where Christ is trying to teach his disciples to perceive and understand in a spiritual way, and not to perceive and understand in a secular way, but practice interpreting your reality in a spiritual way. What's going to happen to me in Jerusalem needs to be interpreted in a spiritual way, and Christ is preparing them for what will happen when they reach Jerusalem. And they need to interpret what will happen in Jerusalem as spiritual reality with eternal consequences. They need to have the practice of noeo, perceiving with spiritual understanding. They need to have that down before they reach Jerusalem. So the entire trip to Jerusalem, Christ is teaching again and again the doctrine of noesis, to perceive with spiritual understanding. Practice perception with spiritual understanding. And that is exactly what this essay is talking about here, because that is the key turning point in our life as those who live eschatologically. We live in an eschatological way if we live by filtering that which we perceive in a spiritual way. We do that through what? Block 1, construction. Block 1, note 3. Dialectical thought is always construction of a worldview. We are always calling up and reconstructing our worldview. It becomes a habit to bring up our worldview, to bring it up again, and again, and then to perceive our environment through that worldview, which allows us to understand our culture in a spiritual way, to understand our world in a spiritual way. So in block 1, you should circle note 3. All dialectical thought is construction of a worldview. Hegel is all about constructing a universal worldview. In block 2, you should also circle 3, beginning with C, 3C, that our activity of thought should be noesis, to perceive and understand in a spiritual way, from the New Testament verb noeo. From the New Testament verb noeo. So block 2, note 3, C and D. Block 2, note 3, C and D. Circle that. So now we're ready to move on to block 3 and taking a look at what is this category called spiritual mindedness. What is this? Okay, block 3. Nature is the precondition for mind. As we actualize the absolute, the divine idea discloses itself in the dialectic between nature and mind. We reach the stage of subjectivity and spirit, and we create our worldview through the realized immanent rational principle. In other words, through the realized eternal logos. The logos is the immanent rational principle for Hegel. So we create our worldview, which is another way of saying the realization of the eternal logos. It becomes realized as we construct our providential worldview, authored by divine providence. Remember our previous lesson. We construct a providentially authored divine worldview. And that is the realization or the actualization of the eternal immanent logos. Now, block 3, note 2, realizing the immanent rational principle, it is a process of becoming through the activity of our mind as a teleology, as an eschatology. Now, in Christian theology, we don't use theology so much as we use eschatology, because it's all about the eschaton, the end of the movement of the history of Christ. So we don't usually use theology, we usually use eschaton, eschatology. So we're always living the eschatological life. We practice eschatology by participating in the process of becoming as an activity of spiritual mindedness. We negate determinate externality and affirm the inner essential system of the whole. We affirm the inner system of the whole, a system of combined, unified essences or ideas. Block 3, note 3, the system of the whole is progressively unveiled to us. It is progressively unveiled for us. We are drawn inward to our subjectivity, to the activity of our mind. We take up sublimation, negating surface reality and affirming essential inner reality. Through a feeling and an awareness, there's the author's use of feeling as a concept through feeling and awareness. So it does take up the emotional side of the self along with the intellectual awareness. So through feeling and awareness, nature becomes the vehicle of consciousness. Nature, or our culture, becomes a vehicle of our consciousness. Self-awareness arrives alongside with worldview awareness. Our identity becomes linked to the worldview construction. Our providentially authored worldview says a great deal about the world, but it also says a great deal about what does it mean to be a self. What does it mean to live as one who participates in a providentially authored world view? What does that mean for the self? So our providentially authored worldview is also a worldview that defines authentic self-identity. The two come together. Subjectivity cannot be separated from objectivity in Hegel, ever. Never does Hegel separate subjectivity and objectivity. When that happens, that's a failure. That's the beginning of consciousness, but it is not the later realized self-consciousness. We begin with that false split between subjectivity and objectivity, and it's only through maturity that we realize that subjectivity and objectivity cannot and must not be separated. The providentially authored worldview that we construct is a construction for us, for our own selfhood maturity, for our own selfhood growth as believing Christians. Hegel was a believing Christian. Hegel posited the notion of the speculative Good Friday as the negation of the negative. Hegel, in his Christian philosophy, the immanent inner principle of his theism was the idea of the speculative Good Friday as the negation of the negative. What does that mean? It means that all of the negative in the cross has been negated and overcome by the resurrection. Sin taken up in the cross has become negated and overcome by the resurrection. Being forsaken by God the Father was taken up by Christ into the cross, and God-forsakenness has been negated and overcome by the resurrection. Even God-forsakenness has been negated and overcome by the resurrection. Christ cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It was symbolized by 3 hours of darkness from 12 to 3 p.m., and then Christ interpreted that darkness when he declared from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Christ declared to even the centurion standing by that I am suffering eternal God-forsakenness as the Messiah, as the chosen one, as the anointed one. I am taking up into this cross actual God-forsakenness. And in 3 days I shall be raised up and resurrected, and resurrection shall negate and overcome even this God-forsakenness on the cross. So Hegel, he posited the notion or the idea of the speculative Good Friday as negation of the negative. That's what he called it. Jürgen Moltmann, in his second book, The Crucified God, the entire book is dedicated to Hegel's notion of the speculative Good Friday. That's his second book, Moltmann's second book, The Crucified God. It's in the first book, Theology of Hope, but people read over it, they read past it, and so he had to correct the misinterpretations of Theology of Hope by writing a very specific Christology in The Crucified God that focused on the speculative Good Friday as negation of the negative. Good little article here by Harris on Hegel's philosophy of mind. And that is in pages 71 to 92 in New Studies in Hegel, published by Holt, Rinehart, and Winston in 1971.